A very warm welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey as always. I'm pleased that you have joined us.
Everywhere I go, people want to know our happy soul. Why Barbados I come from? Why Barbados I come from?
We appreciate your interest in this series, My Community. More importantly, we welcome your comments. I recently received a letter dated August 30th, which congratulated Daniel Holder for his presentation of August 27th, and which informed that Wosley Roach, better known as Balky, a retired senior operator at Rediffusion, was indeed one of the Roach's brothers of Whitehall. Interestingly enough, Daniel Holder also phoned on the same day to inform that he had inadvertently omitted Balky Roach. To you, the ardent listener to My Community, I thank you for your kind words, your interest in the series, and taking the time to write to us.
Barbados I come from. Why Barbados I come from?
Memory is the cognitive process that underpins almost every aspect of human life. It is the mechanism through which we learn, we grow, we adapt, and we connect with the world and others. Without memory, our existence would be devoid of continuity, meaning, and the ability to navigate the complexities of life. This is My Community, your weekly program that allows you to share your wonderful memories. As Daniel Holder winds up his mini-series on the community of Whitehall, let us see what else he holds in his memory.
I remember there overlooking the traffic lights in Hines Hill. There's a house there, that one thing. But right next to it was a corn mill, belonged to the Innerses. In fact, they also were responsible for Friendly Society. But again, you see, the villages were so close that there was a lot of interlock, a lot of movement between the two, and so on. And I remember as a boy, my grandmother would take me up there to the mill to have the corn. You know, they would grind the corn, and of course, you did not pay them any money. They kept a portion as their payment. And then, of course, they would sell it. But people, you didn't have to pay cash to get your corn ground. You know, you would go grind, you would go take it there, they would do it, and they take a portion as payment, and you took the rest. Yeah, there were things that went on in the village, always interesting. You know, fish. We didn't live in a fishing community, but fish were plentiful. And my grandmother used to dry fish and have them hung up in the house on the line so you could see, you know, the fish there. We had fish year round, flying fish. And everybody had their own little thing, a spinach vine on every paling, so to speak. People thought eating healthy nowadays, but we didn't think of it, but we lived that way because often enough you had spinach in your thing, and people had their gardens. You had some things I used to do, I don't know, go to gardens, and I used to eat raw okras, just go and pick them, break the head and eat them. Raw beans, we call butter beans. Just because there were lots of gardens about. I remember picking sawsops off of trees that were ripe on the tree and just eating. Plenty of mangoes down. So we ate a lot of fruit. When the rain would fall, fall heavily and so on. As boys, we would come out sometimes at night, and we would find, you know, the street light and so on, and we would congregate there and still have our conversations, our fun, etc. And of course, we didn't have the fast food outlet, so we had to satisfy ourselves with some red herring and biscuits, kind of thing. And I remember buying, you could go and by the shop and buy a red herring for 10 cents. Right? And then we built tree houses and so on, played cricket morning, and then afternoon time we would go. And I remember Miss Springer, who was the niece of Rupert and Valley, what I mentioned. She gave us a large iron pot as boys to cook in. So when we finished playing cricket and so on for ball one in the morning, we would assemble there under the mango tree, and everybody would find something to bring, and we would cook. Right? I remember that because the Mighty Herring is also from Whitehall. Who wrote one or two songs for Carew, and who had his own songs as well. But from a boy, he was into singing. Sometimes we had this singing competition among the boys. Of course, invariably, he would always come out on top. He knew a lot of calypsos and so on, but he would sing. And that reminds me to Rose Funeral Home started in Whitehall, because the Mighty Herring, actually his real name is Edward Rowe, and he would be, I think, the cousin of Clifford Rowe, who is the funeral director. That started in Whitehall, but it moved out subsequently. He was on the main road. But the fellas used to enjoy themselves, create their own stuff, their games, their fun, competitions. Sometimes we would do quizzes and so on, So we didn't have much time to get bored. Right. When you were much younger, of course, traditional thing of making trucks and so on, especially during crop time and things. Sometimes you resorted to things which were a bit simpler. You probably got a string of sardine things that you put some strings to them and you pull them along, that kind of thing. Then there was, of course, often enough, the business of Christmas and what we did, traditional things of the marl around the thing and so on. We called it a marl hole then, of course, a small quarry where we would grow, owned by another family, the Roaches. They live in Long Gap. At Christmas time, we get our marl for the house and around the house, that kind of thing. But it's funny, even sometimes we as children formed little groups and we would go around by houses singing and so on. The usual thing and saying the things, and people were kind enough to let us partake of their cake and their pone and that kind of thing, and sorrel and whatever drinks they had. I know people say that we ate a lot of pork and so on, but again, too, people work hard, and that was the thing. You would see those people, coming home from work, and you could see the salt from the perspiration in their shirts, the men especially working on the plantation. And the work on the plantation was an experience in itself. We talk about people talk child labor nowadays, I don't know. We had more cane in Barbados then. So the crop season lasted. So by the time we got home on vacation, people were still in the fields, and we would go out and help them. We would put cane on band. We can lift the big bundles ourselves, but we would put them on the band, and then we would just have to come and tie them and move and go and so on. A number of things are going through my head. The smell of food early on mornings before those people went out. The horn from Warren's, where they had the sugar factory then, And we used to visit Warren's factory Moonlight Night and so on. Walk up there, you had a friend, somebody there, and you would do the thing like, get the crack liquor and so on, cool it and drink. And of course, then there came all the development and so on, because when I was a boy growing up at that age, Eden Lodge was, the landing scheme was a grass piece. And the other area, which is the housing area, was cane ground. So it was just a cart road that we would walk from Whitehall to Green Hill.
The change in landscape and its effect on the people. Now, What about neighborly love or showing kindness and consideration to your neighbors? It is of great importance for several reasons. It shows community cohesion, safety and security, social support and emotional well-being, to name just a few. In the Whitehall community, there was that constant assurance that the more mature neighbors would look after the interests of your child, especially in the absence of experience.
Saturdays, my grandmother would go to town, and she would say to the neighbor, "Al, have a look on the little boy for me." Now, if she did not come back on time, the neighbor would say, "Well, your grandmother come back yet? Okay, come and put this spoonful of food in your mouth." And that was it. I mean, they looked out for each other in that way. When she killed the pig, well, you were guaranteed that you would get a piece of the meat proper. So that was Sunday. But since the pig was killed on Saturday, you would get a piece of the horse leg. So you had a corn horse leg, and you would get some of the tripe, which we call it then, and that you would have that soup on the Monday. Right? So we think, and you move from one house to the other, and in moving, food and fruit and so on were moving. Things were moving, and nobody felt any way about anything. There was this thing. Of course, as a boy, you had to be very careful not to go and do anything naughty, because the eyes were always out. We would, as boys, come home from 8:30 at night. But you did not see anyone, but the next morning somebody said, "Y'all were making a lot of noise over there last night." And they would tell you who else was there, you know. But the thing, the buses, as they traveled, then first it was a Federal, then when they amalgamated, it was a Rockland. We had a chap who was an interesting chap. We would sit by the street light at night. We could not see the bus at the bus stop when it moved off, right? But we had a fellow called Emmy. And when the bus moved off, now there were buses, two of the same type, 44, 46, and 44, 47, and then another type, 748. But when the bus moved off, you're talking two buses of the same type. Emmy could tell you, "Hey, that's 44, 47. But he used to sit in the bus up by the engine and so on. He became a very good mechanic. You see, so he think. Then I mentioned Charles Baker earlier. His grandfather, Mr. Waldron, had a horse cart that he used to, in those days, those are people who used to move, lumber along the wharf and take it to the lumber yards. And on evenings, we would wait for him. Because we'd wait for him a little distance away from the house, knowing full well that we would get a ride on the donkey cart. And if, you know, that was fun for us. A friend of mine, Oscar, who passed away, his father had a horse too. And we used to, if we go for dung or meat, as we call it then, for the animals, we used to get a ride with Oscar. And, you know, with this horse, you only had to tickle it some area in the back of the horse, and it would take off and see us for life going through the car road, holding on for dear life. But that was fun, right? And I remember too, again, talking my grandma, people looked out for each other. I said that a couple of times, but I remember there was an older lady in the village who had had a stroke, and she lived alone, and she, of course, in the absence of electricity, had a kerosene, you know, and my grandmother and some other ladies would go and sit with her at night and leave them. But they would make sure before they leave, they would lower the lamp, put it on a shelf, secure, and so on. And then the first thing they would do the next morning is to check with her to make sure she's all right. We talk about elderly people on their own and so on. Yeah, she was on her own, but her contemporaries who enjoyed good health would look after her, make sure that everything, because her children had migrated to England, make sure that everything was all right. You know, even growing up as a boy, people looked out for you. I mean, people who had not gone to secondary school, but they appreciated the value of education. And you would have to take your report for these people to see. They did not understand a lot of stuff, but they knew what was a good mark or a bad mark. And they would encourage you, they tell you, boy, don't make your mother feel ashamed. You know, they would encourage you to go to school and do it. It wasn't a case, but I didn't have a secondary education, so I don't care if you get one. It was, so this is important. Make sure that you do it, kind of thing. You know, in whatever way they could help, they would help. And that sense of community, I know we have developed, but we have left some very important things behind. You know, one of my sons said to me, because they would have me tell them stories about my growing up as a boy and so on. Every night there before and one said to me, Daddy, you know, we ain't gonna enjoy life like you enjoy it. they somehow in the stories which I told found that there was something in it that said that people looked out for each other, they cared for each other. We had fun as boys growing up.
You wish you were part of those days here in the Whitehall community. There are certain geological and ecological features in our communities that hold importance for both the natural environment and for human culture. Many of us have heard of the caves in Cave Hill, St. Michael, that supposedly lead all the way to Warrens. As expected, a young Daniel Holder explored a section of those caves.
Cave of Cave Hill is right opposite. In fact, it is there by by the girls' school, opposite the Wesleyan Holiness Church. Now, as boys, we used to leave school and go into the cave. You get a bottle lamp and you go into the cave because it's dark. It led all the way to Warrens. You know, the Barak building. So I don't know if, you know, to what extent that is true, but I know as a boy, I went into the cave. And there was an area in the cave as we got inside at that distance that was flat and so on. And we would go in there and sit down. Sometimes being boys, what you would do is out all the love. There'd be a total darkness. And you would hear the bats. Oh, and fellas, you know, if you were a fellow who would get scared and so on, yeah, but I suppose we were maybe brave as boys to go in there. Yeah, so the cave, that cave in particular, and sometimes I know, if I went into the cave, and other boys going along the road and so on, passed by the house, because I lived on the main road and right alongside the street, and my grandmother would ask for me, you know, if what happened, and somebody would reply, "You gone in the cave?" But yeah, I had this adventurous spirit, always doing kinds of things.
For families with religious beliefs, attending church provides their children with a foundation for spiritual growth. It exposes them to religious teachings, values, and moral principles that guide their faith and belief. Church communities provide a sense of belonging and support for children as they become a part of a larger community where they could form friendships, socialize, and share experiences. Let us step back now and learn of Daniel's experiences of church and how his participation in events there prepared him for adulthood.
I go back to church, and particularly Harvest. I attended the Whitehall Methodist Church as the main place that I attended church. But then, of course, I had said earlier that I used to go to the Church of the Resurrection in Green Hill on evenings. But Whitehall Methodist Church would have a big harvest every year, lots of produce. Name it, it would be there. And as children, we were supposed, when we were going to the harvest in the evening, to take a fruit. So you usually took a grapefruit or something like that, and you laid it at the altar around the rail and so on. So lots of fruit and that kind of thing all around the church. The arches then that were built over the doors where the cane, you know, plait it at the top and let it come down. Sometimes the fellas in church somehow, at the ones at the back where it could happen just hanging over, the fellas somehow caused that cane at the back to be reduced in height. They will cut it from the bottom. But, but we look forward to the annual harvest, the offerings and so on, the recitations, the songs and that kind of thing. And every harvest, Joseph Niles was a must. In those days, early days with Joseph, he lived in Spooners Hill. He would come with his box guitar and so on. And that essentially was the highlight, certainly a high point at the harvest. No. And you go dressed in your finery. Oh, and your parents, sometimes those who did not attend church, that apart from Christmas and so on, those parents were at church, certainly to hear their children saying their recitations and so on. And I for a number of years would have said recitations, recited. And somehow I don't remember any of them except for the very first one. And that is an interesting thing. And you know, you go up, as a boy, you saluted, and the girls would curtsy, and they would be encouraged to speak up and so on, and do this thing well, and you'd get the people applauding, and that kind of thing. And in 2016, I was asked at the church which I attend at present for a program that had where the focus was on the children, to write a poem. And I decided, but the thought crossed my mind, you know, it might be a useful thing to write about my experience growing up as a child, as a boy, in the harvest situation, just like the ones who were present in 2016 doing a recitation. And the atmosphere of it, the responses, and so on. And so I wrote this thing, which I shall read shortly, which is called My First, right? And it goes thus. Today you see a lot of children, some without fear or hesitation, but some with fear and trepidation. Come up here, sing, play, or say a recitation. And yes, we in the audience have a ball. But do we ever stop to wonder how it really feels for them all? Many of us can remember, perhaps it was many years ago, boys in short pants and girls' hair in cornrow. When we came up here on stage to face the crowd with our parents sitting there, feeling very proud. Yes, we can remember, just like it is now, when with pride we took that currency or took a bow. But I will tell you the story about my first appearance on stage, which was at a very, very tender age. That was quite a few years ago, when I was only 4 or 5. And not many present here today were alive. I was at that time very small and shy. And I didn't know if to speak or if to cry. My knees were shaking and knocking, and the wooden floor felt as though it was rocking. But I saluted, stood tall and opened my mouth, and the words just started to come out. Bread is a lovely thing to eat, God bless the barley and the wheat. A life, a lovely thing to be. Giver of life, we say bless thee. When it was finished, I hear a woman say, boy, so small. And the one other woman say, like, he ain't got the front teeth at all. And some people were shouting, encore, encore. But the little boy didn't know that Adam May wants more. So you see now that my story has been told. You can understand why today I seem to be so bold. Why can I come and stand up here? Because it started back there. And so today, we must encourage our children so that they can become strong men and women. Thank you.
Well, here's where it all started for a young Daniel Holder, right here in the Whitehall Methodist Church, where he was encouraged to stand up, speak up, to teach, to influence, and to inspire others. That certainly placed him in a very good position to influence many a boy and girl during his teaching career, which spanned 42 years. And so that concludes Daniel Holder's mini-series on his beloved community of Whitehall. A word to the students of history. You have just been presented with very good primary research on this community. Perhaps you might wish to give consideration to having it as your thesis or research paper. Now, to you the viewers, you too are invited to place your community under the microscope as we look back on these many aspects and features of our communities that make them so very special. Thank you very much, Mr. Holder. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. This has been My Community. Please take good care of yourself and look out for the interests of your neighbors.